And so for leaders, it means that you're going to have to coach. You're going to have to communicate what the vision is. Where is it that you want to get to? And then help and coach people along the way.
Do you wonder how trailblazing leaders sense at scale, evolve to innovate, and align the actions in this increasingly digital world? Welcome to the Exploring Leaders podcast. The experienced team at Degosian interviews leaders from around the world for insights and inspiration on how to lead in the digital age. In this episode, Degosian founder Lizelette Engstem, who is also an independent board chair and director, researcher, author, and advisor, asks the questions.
Warm welcome, Stephanie Woerner from MIT CISR, again to the podcast. I'm delighted to have you, and I'm so glad for our collaboration. Would you mind, since you're actually starting to change a bit around your role, to just share a bit, what is it that you do, Stephanie?
So my role has changed a lot. And so I am a principal research scientist. So I do research. And I am director of the MIT Center for Information Systems Research, which is a research center in the Sloan School of Management. And we study how large companies get value from information technology and digital. And my particular research is in a couple of areas. One is I study digital business models. So what are the kinds of business models that companies put into place? How do they make money? How does technology affect that? The second is digital transformation. How do companies change themselves? What are the pathways that they change themselves? The third is on the digital savviness of top management teams and boards. And that's probably the research that is most relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. But I also have a couple of other areas that are kind of new. One is on platforms and how do companies think about platforms? What are the different types of platform designs and how do those impact performance? And then also on enterprise AI maturity. And boy, is that a fast moving area.
I think it's so interesting. And you have so many interesting, and I love our collaborations in all of the different facets. And we're also going to share that you will be on a webinar here on June 18, discussing how does a digitally savvy board look and how do they lead AI? And that's going to be really, really interesting. So I'll start out a bit with, you did a research a couple of years back where you looked at what the digitally savvy board looked like. And I know you've updated that research. What's your kind of key findings from that?
So a couple of things. One is when we did the original research, we took the bios of all of the directors of all of the companies that had more than $1 billion in revenues in 2019. And we, working together, we had 2 board members on the team, plus my colleague Peter Weil and I, going through and creating a corpus of words that we thought indicated that a board member was digitally savvy. And so we were looking at things and we did rounds of kind of refining of this corpus of words. And we ended up with 275 words, and they were around things. Some of them were actually company names. Did the executive work at a specific kind of company? Some of them were around technologies like social media. And we then used a natural language processing and we coded every board member. And then we combined them back into boards. And the hypothesis was that you had to have 3 board members to be digitally savvy. Actually, we did some research to find out, what were this is a pretty common trend across a lot of different kinds of social science research, that 3 makes a difference. And what we found is that boards that had 3 or more digitally savvy board members, and 3 was the magic number, um, actually performed significantly better than companies that did not have 3 digitally savvy board members. And it was huge. It was about 30% more on ROA, 30% more on growth, things like that. Well, 2024 came around and we said, you know what? It's 5 years. The world has changed a lot. Look at AI and look at platforms and look at climate tech and reg tech and fintech. And so we said, let's do the same study. So the first thing we did is we took the 2019 words and we found out that I think it was 72% of the boards were now digitally savvy, but it made no difference at all in firm performance. And so we thought, aha, one is there's probably been a lot of board education on some of these older technologies. But what happens if we raise the bar? What happens if we put in and create a new set of words, and they're around AI, agentic AI, generative AI, robotic AI, and agents and robotics and the technology type of works and the platform type of works that have been in place. And we eventually ended up with, this time we actually had an MIT undergraduate, very, very smart, James Moore. And so instead of just listing out every word, we had stems, and we eventually came out with a number of stems that expanded out to 162 words. And we ran again, and what happened is 26% of the boards were digitally savvy. And once again, it made a difference in performance.
Right.
So that was stage 1. Now, why don't we stop here? But I can then go into stage 2 on some of the committee work that we did.
I think it's fantastic. I think we'll save some of that committee discussions for the webinars so we can have people joining us. I think it's so amazing. And I love that you're actually making this integration between, does it make a difference? Is it in the business results? What can we see? Because it's one thing to have this, and we all know that it really needs to be people who understands both the topic and business to make a difference. I love the way you're doing that. I would, though, however, really like to also have you talk a bit around this thing on the maturity of AI on board, or not on board, the maturity of AI on the enterprises.
You can check out more hints and tips in the blog post covering this podcast episode of Exploring Leaders at the Degoshen blog, which you can find at degoshen.com.
Can you share a bit on what you're seeing there?
Yes. So we, when our sponsors started calling, our members started calling us in 2023 and saying, what are we going to do? What should we be doing? My first reaction is, what's your business problem? But that was not good enough. Our companies are like, where are we? How do we think about what's the stage that we need to be at? How do we get there? And so we started looking. We did 2 things. One is we went backwards and looked at pulling together all of the work that we've done on AI. And we thought, what would really help companies is if we start to develop an enterprise AI maturity model. Mm-hmm. And so putting things together, and then we supplemented it with interviews at, I believe it was 9 companies. It could be longer, more than that. And what we found were that, and I'm getting ready to do a new set of analyze a new set of survey results. So I think things are going to change. Was that about a third of the companies were in a stage that we call experiment and prepare.
Mm.
They were educating their workforce on AI. They were setting up acceptable use policies. They were working on making data accessible. And they were ensuring that decision making is using data, and also starting to think about, where do humans need to be in the loop?
Mm.
Or, the new question is, or where do they need to be at the helm?
Mm.
And, one, I think, reaction is that almost every company goes, oh, it's AI. We always need a human in the loop. Well, remember, there's a lot of work that's done in organizations where we don't have humans in the loop. Now, that does mean that you need to have a lot of predictability, a lot of reliability to do that. But that's one of the things that we talk about. So, exploration and education, phase one. Then the second phase is around building pilots and capability. Again,
Mm.
about a third of the companies are in that stage there. And what they're doing there is they're simplifying their processes. They're creating use cases. I think at that stage, at the very beginning, they're not prioritizing. They're just starting to create the use cases. They're changing their leadership style, and they're really using out of the box types of models. So
Mm.
traditional and generative AI, generative LLM models to augment work. And so this is around business case and pilots.
Mm.
Third stage is where it starts to get really interesting. Again, and I'm using kind of a third, a third, a third, but really it's what you're going to find out is in the fourth stage, we have a very small number of companies. And so I'm going to say about a third here. Here is where you start to develop AI ways of working. You're starting to embed AI into the way that you work. You're automating your processes. You're architecting for reuse. One of the things that we at MIT CISR are quite concerned about is, over the years, we've seen companies put into place lots of technology, often around products, and they're creating silos and spaghetti around their products and services. Can we think about and architect ahead of time so that we don't have silos and spaghetti for AI,
Mm.
because it's hard to clean that up once you put it into place. We see companies starting to incorporate pre-trained models into work, and they're investigating the use of proprietary AI models, and exploring autonomous agents, especially
Mm.
around that process automation, and looking at for efficiencies. And so here we're looking at scaling platforms, creating dashboards, kind of embedding that AI. The fourth stage, where we have a very small number of companies, is where they have embedded AI throughout the whole organization.
Mm.
They're creating and selling AI augmented business services, and they're starting to really combine traditional, generative, agentic,
Mm.
robotic. We
Mm.
think that this is where work is going to go. And so this stage is around continuous innovation and new revenue streams. And what's interesting about this is you start to see real business impacts when you start to move from two to three. And
All
you
right.
see a lot of business impacts. And we see a lot of companies that are really trying to make that change from two to three. And what happens is here, one of the big changes is, how do you prioritize your use cases? How
Mm.
do you clean up? And it's very hard for companies, because it means that it's not just a project. It really means that you need to start envisioning and reimagining the way that your company
Mm.
operates. And so
Right.
that stage from two to three is a real challenge.
I think it's so interesting. I have a couple of things that I'd like. I mean, everything is interesting, but one of them is, you said you can see that leadership starts to change. I think
Mhm.
that's really, really interesting. So, what is it that you see around leadership, and how do you think that change impacts leaders, employees, but also boards?
So we don't know as much about the boards, but we're starting to see some of these changes. But the big change is that leaders, especially at the top, have really been used to this command and control. We're going to set this vision and we're going to tell you what to do. And one of the things that you find out as you work with digital technologies and you work with AI is you don't know what your output is. You really have to sit back and say, we need to learn to be a little more improvisational. We need to do testing and learning. We need to think about creating hypotheses and then test the hypotheses. And so for leaders, it means that you're going to have to coach. You're going to have to communicate what the vision is. Where is it that you want to get to? And then help and coach people along the way. But also, I think that you have to actually work in that way, because if you as a leader are not making decisions based on data, and you're not doing this hypothesis testing, this kind of iterative way of work, why would your people?
Yeah.
To get even more value out of the podcast series Exploring Leaders, you can find everything from research reports to advice and courses at the Degoshen website, which you can find at degoshen.com.
Yeah. I think the other thing that you also mentioned, and that is so interesting, and that is this thing around, I mean, eventually you can say when we have super intelligence, I mean, everything can be automated, but should we? And the question is really how do we work to actually get, you talked about designing in human into business models. Where should we engage? Do you have any insights or findings around that?
We're just starting. So right now, so we in research, when we talk about this, we're talking about the sausage being made right now. So we're at the, so just know that this is really beta, but we're thinking about areas like where do you need a supportive role? Where do you need a human in the loop where they give approval? And then where do you need a human to set direction? And so you want to be thinking about your whole environment. So I'm going to guess, and this seems to be we seem to see this in our interviews, is that as soon as you're talking about work that has got a heavy regulatory component like finance and healthcare, you're probably going to have more processes with human in the loop for approval. Not all of them, but we're seeing companies are pretty, other than chatbots, are pretty loath to do kind of customer facing. They're really working now and saying, well, let's use this for efficiencies first. And so we're not seeing a lot at the customer experience. I think that we will see more, but it's, is it a supportive role or is it a representative role that we see AI moving into? Again, this is really looking forward. We're really pushing the envelope here. Part of the problems have to do with, do you have the right data and AI foundations in place? And so one of the issues around LLMs, especially, it's less for machine learning. With machine learning, you have algorithms. It's fairly, you can kind of go backwards and figure out what the analysis look like. With LLMs, because those are a probabilistic type of model, and they're predicting the next word, you have to think about how reliable is the output. Is it got a lot of variance? So one question is can you actually tell people what happened and how you got the output? And you may have less demands if you have kind of restricted the kinds of restricted the kinds of data, or you've put real guardrails in so that what you get is, you may not be able to explain exactly how you get the app, but if you can get a very reliable, predictable, repeatable outcome, you probably can use that. But I don't think companies have quite figured out all those guardrails yet. We see a lot companies really working and trying to figure out how to do that. So
Right.
it really does mean, when I talk about your platforms and your data, that you've got to have a fairly sophisticated set of data platforms, AI explainability, and then also, do you have the skills in place? Do you have kind of the guardrails? Do you actually know your users? So there's a lot that has to get done to get it to a point where, at least touching the customer, you feel like you can just let them set the direction and let it go. I don't think we're there yet.
Right. And I can confirm, I can see in a couple of companies that they actually had developed it, but coming to the guardrail stage, they actually realized they had to pull it back. So I think that is absolutely the same from that I can see from my horizon. Now comes the $100 million question here. The role of the board in an AI age with agentic AI, where we have in the guiding been guiding people based on our experience and supervising based on a human at almost every important step. Where do you see that the challenges are, and what do you think we should discuss on our webinar coming up?
So I think there are going to be a couple of challenges. One is, are board members using this technology? So and maybe we need to get the use in a very safe environment so that they can see how it is used, where they can see that, oh, the way I phrase the question is very important. Also, it's iterative. If the first answer that comes out is not going to be the right answer. And also, how do you have enough skepticism to say, okay, I want to see the sources. Are the sources good sources? Are they real sources? So there's this bit around, are you using it? So there's a lot of education. Do they have time, to actually talk about this topic? And then the third is, do they actually have the technology? I mean, I don't know that a lot of the board technology actually has it built in. And so it's going to be hard for a board member to use the technology in a way that's not like a toy, but actually for real work. And I think that if you can't see why it's useful for real work, I would think that it would be a tendency for a board member to say, should we spend time on this? And yet I would say this AI piece, from all of the work that we're seeing being done in companies, coupled with this very uncertain, volatile environment, they need to spend time on it. They need to understand, and they need to really start thinking about a new vision for the company, because some of these technologies are going to allow a company to really change the way they do business. And if you're not talking about that, I mean, it's not going to be around, oh, I save a half hour a day on my email. It's going to be, how do we interact with the customer? How do we can we automate something that we've never automated before and really put our efforts towards something else? I think that if they are not spending that kind of time, they're missing a real opportunity.
And we are so much looking forward to discuss this with you when you're going to come and share a bit more with us on this webinar, and also talk about what are the key areas that we can get the boards to start working with and not wait and wait and wait, but also actually getting here a bit more about the research that you're doing at MIT. Thank you so much for this podcast. It was lovely to talk to you again.
Oh, Lisa Latte, I am so excited. I'm so looking forward to it. And these are topics that I am passionate about. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Exploring Leaders, a podcast produced by Degoshen, with the ambition to inspire insightful leadership in the digital age. If you found this episode interesting, join the momentum to amplify the voices of trailblazing leaders by sharing it with others for inspiration. For any questions or recommendations on other inspiring leaders you like to listen to, contact us via our website, degoshen.com, or via social media as LinkedIn or Twitter.